for those out there who aren't familiar with what a walk-on is, can you start off by explaining that?
Sure, happy to do it. In the United States, the NCAA, and NAI, the two, governing bodies, there are schools that give away athletic scholarships at certain levels. A walk-on is somebody who is not recruited by the coaches. They don't receive a scholarship. They ask to try out for the team and do everything they can in order to make the team. And oftentimes, they're the ones who get the least playing time. They do the least fun things in practice. They have a lot of times the hardest hill to climb, but they're the ones who have the most passion out of anybody on the team. So I am a walk-on myself, a 4-year walk-on as well at a Division II small college basketball, Gannon University in my hometown of Erie, Pennsylvania. So that is what a walk-on, and I've lived it, and I'm fortunate to have crossed paths with a lot of walk-ons throughout my career.
Yeah, in your book, I believe you interviewed 31 walk-ons to get their story. And I'm going to get to it in a second about what inspired you to write your book and everything like that. But one question, as somebody who was a scholarship athlete that was out there, and I really admire the walk-ons, but how does somebody, whether in sports or business, develop that mindset that says that even though, like you said, I'm not going to be playing on Friday night, I'm still going to go out there and I'm going to show up and give it 100%. How does somebody develop that type of mindset?
That's a good question. So, and I think anybody can develop it, right? Or some folks are born with, a little bit of a natural, tendency to move in that direction, and other people aren't. I think really what it comes down to is, first, there's a humility to it that you say, even if I fall short, even if I'm not the best one out there, there's something that I'm going to pull from this experience, or something that I'm going to be able to contribute as well. But if all you're looking for is to be the number one, the smartest person in the room, the best person in whatever, that's not going to be a good thing for you. So it's fine to look around and recognize that you are not one of the best, but figure out, how can I fit? How can I help? And then just whenever time, you're going to experience some sort of failure, you're going to experience getting, beat up on or ignored or things of that nature, being able to compartmentalize that and just move on and move forward. And so there's a lot that ties in with the exact walk-on method, but to me, it really starts there. I mean, my daughter is now a freshman in college. She's talking about getting into different things and, talk about running for, student government or something. And one of her, classmates said, but you might fail. You might fall short. And she's like, okay, I might, but it's better than not doing anything. And so that's what I think it really starts with, that mindset of not being afraid to fail, or knowing that when you do fail, you're going to learn from it. You can go and adjust.
I think that is so key, what you just said. And I'm trying to teach my daughter the same thing. She's a lot younger. She's 7. But what I've found throughout my life is that you got to figure out how to get yourself out of the comfort zone. And I think too many times people worry about, oh, if I fail, I embarrass myself, people will laugh at me. But Jim, at the end of the day, who cares, right? And, you have to learn how to be comfortable with failure. Because I really think that that's where learning really comes in, and that's where growth happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that helps people, because I've been teaching this over the years, a lot of times people think outside my comfort zone is the panic zone, right? But really, outside the comfort zone, you should aim for the courage zone, something that makes you a little bit nervous, but it's not so far away that you should be panicking about it, right? For you and me, we shouldn't say, we want to be surgeons. They wheel us into a surgery room and go, all right, cut the patient open, right? We should be panicking. The nurses should be panicking. The patient especially should be panicking. But if there are things that we can do that take us a step outside and stretch that comfort zone into the courage zone, that's where the real learning happens. And that's where we also don't lose our mind as well, being overwhelmed that it's too hard or way too high. It's one step at a time, making little steps in progress there.
I think that's key. It's like, especially if you have a big goal, like which I know is step one, and getting ahead of myself, is that you want to have a big goal, but you also want to have little mini steps, milestones along the way. So going back to your book, and here's what I liked about your book. I thought it was very accessible, right? It was something that I could relate to. Hey, anybody who puts in the effort and has the control within themselves can make this happen and be successful. And whether, even though it's called the walk-on method and it's 31 athletes, whether you're in sports, and this is for our listeners out there, whether you're in sports or you're not in sports, I really think that the 5 steps that you have in your book could apply to anybody in their careers. So what inspired you to write this book?
So good question. But before I get to the inspiration, I will say, just as a point, I made sure I tested the book before I published it. I wrote a few sample chapters. I intentionally shared them with people who had zero interest in sports whatsoever, because I wanted to see if it was accessible and relatable to them, then I thought I had something. If it was something only people who pay attention to, Division III lacrosse, and you have to know the intricacies of it, then it wouldn't be any fun at all. So I definitely tested it there. I didn't guess as to what I thought was going to be relatable or accessible. I made sure that it was, and I got good feedback and was able to adjust along the way. So what kind of motivated me was, the first book that I wrote, it was actually going back 10 years ago. I wrote a book called Hire Like You Just Beat Cancer. So it's HIRE. It was a hiring best practices book. And it was written in part my experience as a hiring manager, but it's also through the lens of being a cancer surviving executive, which I am now for 22 years. I'm a colon cancer survivor. And so I have folks.
Congratulations, Jim.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I always give credit to, we were talking about surgeons and the nurses. They're the ones who took care of me. I just kind of sat there, lied there. They knocked me out and got everything done. But I appreciate that. So when that book came out, there were a lot of folks in the business world that I had run with. They didn't know that I had cancer, right? It's not something you exactly weave into a conference call, right? And so I had folks who said, wow, now I understand why you're driven like you are, why you behave the way that you are. And I remember thinking like, well, thank you. But I thought, I don't wake up every day thinking like, I'm a cancer survivor and I got to overcome it and things of that nature. I had that mindset to some degree when I was going through the chemo and all sorts of stuff like that, but that wears off over time. And I thought, what really has been the key to my success? Why do I behave the way that I do? And I looked back and it mirrored the process that I had walking on, back in the day. This was the late 1980s, early 1990s. Like I said, a Division II Gannon University, a small college basketball powerhouse. And so I originally thought, maybe I should just do an entire book on my story. And then I thought, who's going to be like, ooh, great, I can't wait to read about Jim Roddy's story and all that. Then I thought, well, maybe I should test it and see. My story could be one of the stories, but are there other folks, right? Because I could just be, somebody could say he got lucky, it's, an anomaly. So I decided to find 5 walk-ons and interview them and see if their experience as a walk-on paid off in their professional career. I also made sure they had to be in the workforce at least 5 years as well. And so I did 5 interviews and I was like, man, these stories are great. In fact, they're better than mine. And then I did 5 more. I'm like, these are great stories as well. And the snowball kept going and going. And once I had 30 stories, then I was like, I really think I have a great variety here to tell as well, in terms of young, old, male, female, a wide variety of sports, all sorts of different angles that they came to become a walk-on, that really made it that somebody could find at least one, if not multiple stories in the book that they could relate to, and they could start patterning their life after and really help accelerate folks. So that was the motivator behind the book, and initially to clear up a misunderstanding, but then hopefully to inspire others to figure out what is on their own career path to success.
I listened to your interview with Jeff Reed on Lead to Read, and I got a big chuckle out of, you said that you put your story at the end because you weren't going to write 250-page book on just your story.
That is correct. Yes.
I want to take a step back for all you leaders out there. One of the things that Jim said at the very beginning of this was that when he tested his book, he wrote a couple of chapters and then he went out to people and asked for feedback, which I think is so critical as a leader, to be able to be vulnerable enough to be able to share something with somebody and open up in a way that people feel comfortable giving feedback. Do you have any tips for others out there on how to, let's say, receive feedback?
Sure. Well, first I'll say is, we were taught in school, You couldn't look off somebody else's paper. You couldn't say, hey, what answer did you get, and be able to compare notes, right?
Oh,
But
I did that. I did that all the time. I got in a little trouble for that, though.
Right.
But,
You get in trouble, you get your hand slapped, right? The nun comes
yeah.
over with the ruler, right? And smacks you
Yeah.
on the knuckles. But cheating is legal, right? In the business world. Like, don't take that out of context, but you can compare notes. You can ask other people, can you look at this and give me feedback on it? And so in terms of, so this is where the walk-on experience does tie in as well, right? You watch film, and the coach critiques you in film, and you're like, well, this is the path to success, right? And you quickly become very accustomed to doing that. I also have a writing background as well. You become very accustomed to sharing your story with somebody else, and they're putting all sorts of red marks all over it and asking questions. So there's a real thing of, number one is understanding you don't have to guess, do people like this? Are people going to understand this? How is this going to resonate with people? You just go out and test it and ask them, and they'll give you the answer, right? You don't have to have all the answers yourself. So that's why I think some humility again comes in there, where you have to say, I don't have all the answers. I don't know for sure that people are going to like this. And you go in and test it with them. And then also I'd say when you get the feedback is to always try it on, right? Even if initially you're like, this doesn't ring right, try it on and be like, well, maybe it is. Let me think through that. And maybe if somebody's saying, reduce this thing by 50%. Well, maybe you only need to reduce it by 10%, but reducing it is probably the right thing to do. So there's an element of, you have your principles that you want to stick to, because some people might not know exactly what you're going for, but run it through that filter, but sincerely run it through the filter. Don't get into this,
Confirmation
dismissive,
bias.
right. And I have to be right. So that to me is a real thing. And again, if you get that experience of having people give you all sorts of criticism, it's no big deal, right? Getting criticism now. I've been doing it for so many years. I actually feel bad when people don't give negative feedback or don't ask some tough questions.
I think humility is one of the key traits in any industry, as a leader, realizing that you don't have all the answers. And the last thing I'll say about it, when I was writing my book, I was trying to think about who I wanted the target reader to be. And I gave it to an individual on my team, Nick Silverthorne. And I said, give me some honest feedback. And he let me have it in a good way, though, right? He's like, this doesn't make sense. This is boring. You need to have more how-tos. So I think that you don't have to have all the answers. And I love that book out there called Steal Like an Artist. It's kind of like looking at somebody's page. You don't have to do it all on your own, and you can just learn and adapt. So, right? Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I had a colleague who actually said, if you have an idea that is wholly original, it's probably wrong. That's what he always said, like, it's probably more an iteration of something else. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with sending something out to the market, getting the feedback, and making adjustments. One of my favorite books is called Getting to Plan B. And so it talks about, you have your original plan A, but as it continues to interact with the market, you're getting feedback, you keep making adjustments along the way. Oftentimes plan B is considered lesser, but if you follow that path, your plan is to get to plan B, because plan A, before it touches the market or gets any feedback, is going to be worse than actually what plan B is.
Totally. And I think your plan or your strategy is always iterating. You always want to iterate on it. And I think Mike Tyson had that great quote that everybody's got a plan or a strategy until you get punched in the face. And then
Exactly right. Yeah. Exactly right. The only Mike Tyson quote worth repeating.
Yeah. He's making a comeback, though. He's making a comeback, supposedly. So walk us through your 5 steps.
Sure. So the 5 steps to the walk-on method. And the way that I like to do this, Damon, is I quickly share the concept, and then I'll give an example after each one of them, because that really makes it come to life. So step number 1 is take a big shot, right? Because anybody can make a layup. Don't sell yourself short. Don't aim for something safe. Don't play it safe. You really need to take a big shot. An example that I have of that in the book is Colleen Healy. She was from Connecticut. She was from a family that was middle class or lower middle class. Nobody had ever been to college before. And she was a very, very good athlete. She took the first offer that she had to go to a Division II school to play both softball and basketball. And she was getting a lot of playing time there as her freshman year, having a great start to the season. But she thought to herself, I want to do better. I can do better. So she, after one of the games in the middle of winter, packed up everything she could in her car, started driving home, and then her car broke down, and then her car caught on fire. She got a lift from somebody, and they took her to a friend's at a college campus. She got to call her parents and say, "Hey, mom and dad, you know that scholarship I had for college? I gave it up. I'm quitting." Because I want to try to play basketball at the University of Connecticut. Oh, and by the way, the car's on fire. Can you come pick me up? And we have to go get a mechanic for it. But long story short, she walked onto the UConn women's basketball team, which anybody who isn't familiar with it, that is like the epitome, the number one women's basketball sports program. And she was a role player. She went from being Miss Everything at a smaller Division II school to really being a role player if she ever got playing time on that team. And that is a team that ended up taking off and becoming, again, one of the greatest programs. And again, what she did was she took that experience to say she never thought she would leave the state of Connecticut. She ended up moving to Florida. She ended up becoming a very, very strong performer in the pharmaceutical industry. And then she's also spun that off into a leadership and speaking career, right? So the girl who a lot of people said she'll never make it in college, she's not college material, like she's got a ceiling, she's crashed through that ceiling, all because first she took that big shot. When if you would have run it through the logic filter, 99% of people would have said, no, 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 play it safe, play it safe. She took a big shot and she's been succeeding ever since.
There's that great quote out there, right? I can't remember exactly what it is shoot for the moon and you might land in the stars anyways. So essentially what she did and what we're talking about is, if you just go for a layup, that's all you're going to get, right? But if you're going to try to shoot a 3-pointer, you're never going to go beyond if you just don't set your sights as high as possible. Can you give us an example of what that looks like in the business world?
Sure. So one thing that I coach oftentimes I work for a retail technology association as a CEO, and oftentimes my business coaching comes into play. I say all the time, try, test, measure, adapt. Try, test, measure, adapt. And like step number one is, for the love of God, do something, right? Like try something that a successful business is doing and see how it integrates into your organization, right? It doesn't have to be some wild risk in terms of, can I jump out of a plane without a parachute and still land on my 2 feet, right? You don't have to be ridiculously risky with that, but you have to try something. And so that's what, inside our own organization, we have an idea. We always try to run it through critical thinking, right? Do we fully understand the best practices? Do we fully understand the situation? What outcomes are we looking for? And then once we know where that is, then we can start following through in terms of what are the actions and then keep iterating along the way. But that really what I think is the first step, is saying we have to do something that's going to better our business and better our organization. Let's take a risk and try this thing. Not you put the whole company, on a roulette wheel on black and spin, but it has to be a calculated risk. And then you got to do the work, right, in order to prepare it. It's not just going to try this one thing, cross my fingers and hope that it happens. And that's a lot you'll see as we get deeper into the walk-on method. You really see that these walk-ons weren't just somebody who hopped out of bed and said, I'm going to give this a shot. They put in all the work that gave them the confidence, and they felt like they deserved to have success because of all the work, all the prep work that they did and put in. So that's what I'd say from a business standpoint. If you want to try to do something, do all the research, do all the work, get all the feedback, so you have a really good gauge in terms of, I am prepared, right? Nobody could be more humanly prepared than I am right now to take this venture on.
I like to call it purposeful awfulizing. If you're going to take a big risk, fast forward a year and a half and say, if I completely fail at this, can I survive that? And if you can survive that, go for it. Now, let's look at it from somebody who maybe wants to get into leadership, but they have limited beliefs of saying like, well, I don't know if I'm qualified for this. What advice would you give for them to take a big shot, either to leave the job that they're at, say they have enough money saved so they can survive it, but how do you get over those limited beliefs to stick your neck out there and do it?
I mean, I get into do the work, and the work is going to tell you whether you should do that or not, right? And when I say do the work, there's an element of reading, right? Are you reading a lot of books? Are you talking to a lot of folks about, getting their opinion, getting their feedback? Are you listening to podcasts? Are you improving yourself as a speaker? Or are you just showing up saying, this is what I am, this is what you got, and well, let's see how it works out. So to me, there's no substitute for that. I say all the time in a lot of my coaching, there's no substitute for a competent person getting closer to a situation, right? So get really close to the situation, figure out what skills you need for that, what experiences you need for that, and then just go and develop them and build them. And that doesn't even guarantee success. My assistant coach at Gannon, John Riley, he's now the head coach at Division II Christian Brothers. He would always say to us, we have to work this hard, this extremely hard, just to have a chance at success. It doesn't guarantee success, but it gives you a chance. So that's a lot to me of what it is rooted in. And a lot of these walk-on stories, like there are threads that went throughout it. Nobody just, again, fell out of bed, showed up, and they're like, hey, I made the team. They put in many, many hours of work when nobody else was watching. Actually, I can't quote it, but it's in the front of my book. I can't quote any poetry. It's the only poetry in the book, but it talks about, right, while others slept, they were the ones toiling during the night anonymously. That would be my recommendation for folks. If you really want to do something, put in the work in advance. If you do that, you're going to increase your chance of success. It doesn't guarantee it, but it also gives you that confidence in terms of, nobody's worked harder than me. That's what I had when I tried out for the Gannon basketball team. I knew a lot of those guys played a lot of basketball, but I'm like, nobody's put in the work that I has. I deserve a shot at making this team.
So the first two, we've talked about two of the most important traits as leaders, humility and work ethic. Before we get to step two, a quick story I want to share is I have a friend who was 500th in the world playing tennis, and his tennis career ended. He didn't make any money on it, and he got into investment banking. I got an interview for investment banking, and he sat down with one of these head guys. He got the interview because of somebody knew him from tennis, and the guy interviewing him said, "Why should I hire you? I've got 30 MBAs lined up who went to Ivy League schools." And you know what he said, Jim? He said, because I will outwork every one of them. And he said to me, he said, Damon, that's what I did. I just worked harder than everybody out there. And I wasn't guaranteed success, but I created my own luck. He's like, I don't think there's any such thing as luck. I created my own luck. And that always stuck with me, telling that, because being humble and work ethic is so important. So let's go on to step number two.
Well, and that story segues perfectly into step number two. So step number two is make a passion statement with a P, not a fashion statement. And so it's prepare with passion, practice with passion, and then play with passion, right? And we've alluded to this before. Don't wish that your dream is going to come true, right? Don't give your all only when the opportunity presents itself. Don't wish for a dream. Walk on to that dream. And a great example of that is Sean Bedford. And so he ended up being a walk-on at Georgia Tech. He wanted to go to Notre Dame, but Notre Dame wouldn't return any of his calls or letters or outreaches or anything of that nature. And in fact, at Georgia Tech, they weren't even really interested in having him on the team. He happened to get a really good academic scholarship, a president's scholarship, so he was able to go to school at a reduced cost. But then when he was on the team, he was sixth string on the defensive side, and he even want to play defense. Sixth string, yes. He went like that deep. He wasn't.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he wasn't even sniffing the sidelines, let alone the field. He was that far back from everybody else. But he said, what can I do? How can I outwork everybody else? And so the guys who are that low on the roster, they know they're never going to play. They put them on the scout team. So all they do is mimic what the other team is going to do. Well, he made sure he studied extra film on the opponents. He went not just to see what their first string would do, he saw what their second string would do. And he was the best scout player you could possibly be. And that caught the coach's attention. And then they had some injuries and issues on the offensive side of the ball. And one of the coaches, the head coach, said, would you ever like to play offense? He said, that's actually what I would like to do. Like, that's what I did all in high school. He ended up moving over to the other side of the ball where he was like fourth string center, but slowly but surely worked his way up. And then his college career, he wanted to go to law school, and he got waitlisted. And when he got waitlisted for law school, right, a lot of people are like, well, maybe I shouldn't be a lawyer. Maybe I won't go to this school. And he said, hey, wait a second. This is exactly what I went through at Georgia Tech for football, right? They essentially waitlisted me, put me way back in the sixth string, said you're never going to be anything. And I outworked it. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to outwork these folks here as well. So while he was waitlisted, he ended up graduating the top 10% of his class because he said, I made sure I'd outwork everybody. And he had a leave no stones unturned approach. And he does that now as an attorney. He also got a degree in aerospace engineering as well. And he did color commentary for the Georgia Tech football team. So that guy made all his dreams come true. He didn't wish they would come true. He actually made them by outworking everybody every minute of the day. He said he didn't sleep as much as his teammates or his classmates, but he's as successful, not more successful than they are today.
And I've seen that in my own career, where I was when I was at Arizona State. Some of the most talented players on our team, first round draft choices, they were the guys rolling in 5 minutes before practice started. And at that level, they could be great, right? They could do fine. But as they moved forward in the minor leagues and the big leagues, they just couldn't compete anymore because they didn't have the mindset or the work ethic, and that carries over into your professional career as well. One of the things that I liked that you were talking about is that if as a scout player, how important that is, listeners out there, because if you're taking the approach of you're making your team better because you're competing in practice with them to give them the opportunity to do well in the games, and taking that approach, I think really, that makes a difference between a good company, a good team, and a great team, is when everybody realizes, and you have a coach that helps everybody realize that they have an important role on their team.
Exactly right. Yes. And again, you might not have the most experience, you might not be the most skilled, but you can put in the work. You can help set the pace for that. And again, that's part of my experience as a walk on. A lot of the scholarship guys would be like, hey, let's take it easy today. And I was like, I can't take it easy any day because I always thought they were looking for an excuse to throw me out. They didn't need me, on the court. But if I was able to set the pace, a day when guys wanted to jog, I kept sprinting and it would show them how they were dogging it and they knew. And I would get looks from time to time. I can remember our starting point guard give me this look like, slow down. And I'm like, nope, not doing that, right? Because that was my role. That was the job that I was playing. I'd say another thing that you touched on, Damon, is the difficult situations. And I remember interviewing, I used to have a sports magazine. That was the first business that I had started, and interviewing a coach and saying, how come all these kids that are great in middle school, don't become good in high school? And he said, because their coaches know they're really good going to their right hand. And so all they do is run plays for them going to the right hand instead of in practice making the kid work on their left hand. He said, you get to a higher level, someone's going to force you to go to your left. You can't go to your left. And suddenly you're like, ooh, a challenge. It's not easy. And then those kids collapse. He said the kids who get challenged, right, and develop their full skills, those are the ones who become successful long term. So I guess that's a message for leaders out there in terms of, are you figuring out where you can shore up, and are you challenging your people so they actually can get better, right? Do they have the opportunity? Do you give them the opportunity to make a passion statement, or are you just having them fill in the whatever blanks you want them to fill in?
What did you learn from sports that you've been able to replicate in the business world?
I would say one of the most important lessons is the level of relationship that you build among the team, and then the coaching. A coach is always going to keep it real with you. They're going to love you, but they're also going to make sure they correct you and help you become the best athlete possible. And a lot of that deals with speaking the truth in love, giving feedback, but being very constructive and how you can develop. So that was something that was very important for me, and how that relates to leadership. Just understanding that feedback is how we grow. And the moment that you stop receiving feedback and stop growing from it, that's when your leadership comes to a halt. So I say that was one of the greatest takeaways. I would say the second thing is the vision, working together as a team towards a vision. Sports, of course, everyone wants to get to a championship, but you meet those special coaches that impart something different. They impart belief in you. And that's something that I strive to do. Any leadership position I'm in is understanding like, hey, I want to do what my coach did for me to someone else, which is impart belief, which kind of goes back to the mission, right? Inspire, motivate, and empower others to reach their potential. And that's essentially what I got from my athletic journey.
That's amazing. What I'm hearing you say there is the importance of feedback and learning from that feedback and creating clear vision. And when it comes to vision, the first thing that I think about is when I was at Pepperdine, where our coach's vision for a little school like that, Hall of Fame coach Andy Lopez, was win the World Series. We're going to win the World Series. And that was just a very clear vision. He got everybody behind it. And it was also, for a school like that at the time, a moonshot vision. And I got hurt, but the next year they won the World Series. But it stuck with me just like with you. Now, going back to feedback, I like how you say that leaders are learners.
Yes.
So what do you mean by that? And why is it important, do you believe, to be a learner?
So I used to say that leaders are readers, but once you have kids, you figure out that reading is sometimes a challenge. So that phrase has changed to leaders are learners because learning is different from everyone. We're going to learn having this conversation. Some people learn through watching videos. For me, it's a mixture of both watching videos, taking notes. But I say the most impactful thing with learning is as I am learning something, what is the application? So I try to just tell people as you're learning, find the quickest way to apply. So if I'm reading something and it's talking about the power of recognition, all right, how can I take what I'm reading, listening to, or speaking with someone today and actually implement it? So if it's the power of recognition, they say, hey, what's really impactful is writing a thank you note for a team member or showing some type of appreciation and gratitude. How do I implement that today? And I think that's the difference between gaining knowledge from reading and gaining wisdom, which is just the application of the knowledge. That's when the learning really takes place. So I would just encourage everyone, you can read one book and for that whole year, but if you implemented everything from that one book, you would be better off than someone that's read 100 books, but have not found a way to implement what they're reading. That's what I feel when I say all leaders need to be learners.
Can you give our listeners another example of how, whether you're reading a book or reading a blog or listening to a podcast, how either you yourself or somebody on your team has been able to apply? Because what you said is so important.
So I'll say one of the things that I'm pretty consistent with, even with my team, is there's a morning message. Like my team's know in the morning, Carlos is about to send us something. Whether it's on Slack channel, whether it's through a text message. But whatever I'm reading at that point, sometimes learning is teaching. It's just transferring what I've read in the morning and imparting it into someone else and saying, hey, how can you implement this today? So if I read something that's talking about time management, knowing what the priorities are, it might be a simple ask of, hey, team, what's our top 3 priorities today? Or what's going to be your top 3 things? And then the team attacks, and then we can hold each other accountable to make sure, hey, these are top 3 things that I'm striving to achieve today. And then it's a way that we all can help each other stay consistent towards those goals. I'll say another thing, I journal a lot. So anything that I'm reading, I can take notes on. So if I have a conversation and share something with them, I'm like, hey, I read something that I think would interest you. And I can pull it out on my phone. I can say, hey, this is one of the nuggets that I got this morning. Maybe it'll help you in this situation. So that's another form. And then I say the last thing is there's a pyramid of learning. Anyone can go on Google and look it up, but it gives you the different percentages of how we learn. And group discussion and teaching is among the top ways in the learning pyramid, how people learn and retain information. So anytime that we can have a group discussion like we're having, or do that with our team, and then anytime that we're able to teach something, it's improving the efficiency of what we've learned. So I would say those are just some helpful tips. Anyone that's looking to learn, to share what they're learning, and to continue growing.
I love that. And one of the things that we do at Learn It is I'll find a book I love, and a group of us will all read the book, and then we'll have 1 or 2 meetings, and I'll ask everybody to come prepared to take one insight that they've learned and apply it to how it would help them with their work. And that's worked out well. Now, let me ask you this. It's pretty clear that you love leadership, all right? And you love learning. Have you always been like that, or where did this come from?
It actually started from my mom. My mom used to make me read Proverbs every morning, and I hated reading. I absolutely hated reading. It was a waste of time to me growing up, and now it's just turned into one of those things where I'm so thankful for my mom really forcing it on me back then. And then in college, I took a leadership course, and we read the book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. I started reading, and man, I couldn't put the book down. Like, I was hooked. I was, oh my gosh, I need some more of this. And from there, I just became really passionate and really hungry about growth and leadership. And then I started to find what I feel like my purpose is in life just from reading that one book.
And what would you say your purpose is?
Man, inspire, motivate, and empowers others to reach their potential. So everything that I do is really centered around that. It keeps me centered. It keeps me balanced. That's my core. It's okay. Situation isn't good. Circumstance is tough. I might not like what I'm experiencing, but how do I go back into that center of, okay, I'm here for a reason. I'm here to inspire. I'm here to motivate, and I'm here to empower. And a lot of times that's not going to take place in a great environment. It's going to take place in a bad environment. So I have to realize that sometimes that situation based off of my vision and purpose, like I'm there for a reason. And I just have to reconnect to that center. But once I do, that's usually when things start to flow and that leadership starts to turn. I start just going back to that center. So I say that's what really helps me is just getting back centered to my purpose and vision for life.
So you mentioned that a lot of times this happens in either a bad environment or bad situation. Can you share an example of what you mean by that?
Yes. So I started my career in a startup facility, which was perfect for me. Coming from a sales background, getting into operations, showing up to operations, probably not the best thing to do your first day, showing up in dress slacks and in a salesman's.
Hey, it's better than flip flops and a wife beater. 15 minutes late.
Oh no, I was early. People thought the position I was in and what I was dressed for, people thought I was something else. Let me just say that. Oh man. But going in and just having to learn and having to grow. And from that standpoint, I went to a red site. So a red site is a site that you're going and the people know you're getting ready to take over. So that's all influence. The first couple of months when you go into a red site, the situation is you really can't interact with the team. You have no authority to do anything. So any changes you want to make has to be driven by influence. But have to keep in mind, these people know that they have an opportunity to lose their job once you go in and take over. So that was the first lesson in leadership. And John Maxwell says it all the time. Leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. So that's all about relationships. It's all about connecting. That's all about empathy. Because at the end of the day, leaders move things through others and with words. So if you're not able to lead others and you're not able to lead with words, leadership journey is very challenging and you have to rely on authority and title, which is very level one leadership. So that's where my journey really took off because my team was able to get a little bit ahead of the curve just because I got the chance to know, okay, what is these people's aspirations? What are their dreams? What are their goals? And how do I tie that in to what the business is trying to achieve and the objectives? And then what are their strengths? Where can I place them in situations where their strengths have an opportunity to shine? And then through doing that, we go into the recognizing people for their strengths, making sure that they know that they're appreciated, not just for the job that they're doing, but making sure that people are valued for who they are. And I would say that was the first lesson that I learned in that early leadership position, the power of influence and how you just by changing one person's life, that influence goes to other people. And sooner than later, the culture was really excited because, man, we feel valued, we feel respected, we have a mission, and we have a leader that cares for us. So that's what I got in my first journey. But every journey after that has been going to an environment where things are bad and people need a leader to come in to help reshape the culture.
Yeah, people are super resistant to change, right? They either are worried they're going to lose their job or they're going to have to do things differently. What role did knocking on doors play in your sales journey, and how has it shaped your success both in sales and entrepreneurship?
Super good question. Man, anybody who asks me, like I'm part of some program of the DECA high school, something, mentoring some kids. And I tell them, listen, just go knock on some doors. Because if you go knock on 10,000 doors, you will be a better communicator. So I think it comes down to communication. When I knocked on doors, there's a big piece of recruiting as well. You're recruiting, you're managing, you're training, and everything is 100% commission based. I was also very successful on the recruiting side because as I recruited people, it wasn't like, hey, this company is going to pay you 50,000. These guys are 60 and we're 70,000. It was like, forget about that. What do you want to do with your life? I want to be an author. Okay. Tell me how, if I can't teach you how to knock on a door, grab somebody's attention when their kids are in the bath and their dog's barking and sell them a year-long contract within 15 minutes and peace out. Like, Tell me how that's not going to make you be a better author, doctor, teacher, accountant, construction worker. You know what I mean? So I focused on the sales skills, and I guess that's where my answer is going towards. Every interaction is a sell, including me trying to sell you and all the listeners that every interaction is a sell, right? So diving into that door to door and kind of shaking off the, no, Damon, I don't want pest control because I hate you as a person, and interpreting it as more likely what it is as, no, I'm just not interested. Go to the next door, right? If you could separate yourself emotionally from that outcome, then it allows you to take a lot more risk because you're not really operating as much as out of fear, I guess.
Absolutely. And I think we're all in sales in one way or the other. And going back to, I've heard you say this before, professional communication is so key. What is an example of how knocking on doors has helped you become a better communicator?
The thing that I applied the most to knocking doors that really relates to me now, I think it came from the Rich Dad, Poor Dad. But it's all about learning. So I'm knocking doors, making good money as a pest control sales rep at 22, 23-year-old, making $250,000 in 4 or 5 months. But there's other people making more, not that I needed more, but I adapted the mentality of what is that guy doing, saying, what's he doing with his face? How is he standing? What's he doing that I can't learn? And that mentality then kind of translates really well to sales. If I'm getting an objection, how am I going to craft my pitch to not get that objection again? So a common objection is, oh, I don't have, they open the door, they're like, oh gosh, I don't have any time, right? Let's say that. If they open up the door, you open up the door, before you say, oh crap, I don't have any time, I say, hey, I don't have much time. I'll be quick. I can guarantee what you're not going to say is, oh, well, I also don't have much time. Hey, you're the 20th guy that knocked on my door. Okay, I'm gonna knock on the door. They're gonna open it up and I say, hey, how's it going? I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, is this another damn solar sales rep? Probably the 20th guy this year. They laugh, I laugh. And what they don't say is, hey, you're the 20th guy on my, So learning how to, knowing that there's a solution to everything, you just need to find it, and then applying it to sales. It's just so easy with door to door. It's like, okay, that's the 4th time I got this objection. How do I overcome it before they bring it up? And then that translates to raising capital. I didn't have any experience with that. To fuel Dirty Doe's growth in the last 2 years, I raised $9 million, and it was same sales concepts, right? Same outreach, same referrals, same everything I did with door to door translated almost perfectly to raising money to fuel the franchise company.
No, I think that's great. And what I hear you saying is anticipating objections really when it comes to it and it comes to learning, right? So if you're in sales, whether you're knocking on doors or you're cold calling or whatever it is you're doing, if you get ahead of it, then you kind of put them almost on the defensive, and sometimes they can even laugh. So I think that's awesome.
And that's the communication. So that's the answer to like, what is the communication? How does that, you're a professional communicator by foreseeing their needs as much as possible. Like that's what professional communication is. And if you can't, then you're asking the right questions, right? But what you're not doing is just shoving crappy information down their throat and hoping that they buy at the end.
Now, another area that I really like what I've, since I've been researching you, is how you talk about putting a value to your time. Can you share a little bit about how you go about doing that?
Yeah. If you're straight commission, it's easy, right? So I have to make how many phone calls? So, but we'll stick with door to door. How many doors do I have to knock to get somebody to answer? Well, it's going to depend on the time of day, but on average, 20. Kind of making up these numbers, right? If I knock on 20 doors, and if I'm in it's the evening, then I'm probably going to get 13 of them to answer, right? And of those 13, 10 of them are actually going to be homeowners, decision makers. And of those 10, I'm going to set appointments with probably 6 or 7 of them because I'm really good at setting appointments. And of those 6 or 7, I'm going to have 1 to 2 drop off that don't keep their appointment. So maybe I only have 4 or 5 appointments. 4 or 5 appointments, I close 90% of the people that'll listen to me. So let's call it 3 deals. I make 10 grand a deal. So I made 30 grand, and then I trace it all back. Okay. How long did it take me to knock on 20 doors? 5 minutes a piece, an hour. I don't know. Right. I mean, it's way longer than that because you're talking to people. Let's call it 4 hours. 4 hours to knock your doors and have those conversations. How long did it take to set up the appointment, to the cancellations, and then even, okay, well, what about the follow-up appointments? Because even when they sign, I still have to spend another 2 or 3 hours to make sure. Then you calculate it. Okay, I spent 30 hours and I made 3 sales. That's 30 grand. So I'm worth $1,000 an hour. And then it's, hey, Bennett, our books are in a mess. Can you get in there and clean it up? And it's like, no, I could go knock more doors and make the company $1,000 an hour, and I could pay somebody $28 an hour. So I'm going to make the company $980 an hour more by refusing to do the books.
That is exactly what I'm talking about, Bennett. We have what Bennett's saying here is understand what your value is and outsource some of this work, because we have a lot of sales reps, sales executives who listen to this show, and sometimes they'll come to me and say, "Hey, David, I'm gonna take a PTO day so I can go paint the garage or something like that." Well, what is your time worth, right? So first of all, you could pay somebody $20 an hour, $30 an hour to get that done. If you're making $400 or $500 an hour when it comes to focusing on sales related opportunities, and taking that even a step back, I loved how you were talking about, okay, well, how many calls do I need to make to get as many leads that I need to have in order to close an opportunity? It's putting that all together, because when you do that, you understand what it's going to take to hit your pipeline or whatever it is your goal is. So I think that's brilliant.
I think it really gives you the clarity, and especially in sales, when you start every day with $0, if I don't find somebody to agree with me that this product solves their needs, I don't make any freaking money. So and then you're knocking doors in the morning and nobody's answering. But if you're like, law of averages, I'm worth $1,000 an hour, not this hour right now, but on average. So that allows you to keep pushing. And, same thing with investment, same thing with anything. If you know your numbers, how many people to have to outreach, then it's like, okay, I got 19 no's. I'm probably close to a yes. Maybe I'll get another 19 no's, but then I'll probably get 2 yeses in a row because I know law of averages apply.
I look at your body of work, and you've done so many different things, from being an attorney to being at Pepperdine to now founding your own media platform. And it all kind of ties back into sports, really, if you think about it. So what motivates you, or what gets you so pumped up or excited about sports?
What I love the most about sports is you have a subject where everyone who is an actor or player in that subject or in that field is committed to the utmost greatness. You do not become a high level athlete without waking up every day and committing to be the best that you can be. Now, as we're probably going to go into, I've covered a lot of athletes and I've spent a lot of time in locker rooms. And there's always that outlier. I'm not going to name this person, but there's one NBA athlete that I covered who had a really long career. And as truth would have it, he hated basketball. Like this man absolutely hated basketball. He was just gifted with natural ability. He's the outlier. Most people who make it to the highest level of sport are people who wake up every single day committed to one thing, and that one thing is being great. And so as someone who aspires to do the same, what I love the most about sport is I have in front of me hundreds, if not thousands, of role models for what I strive to be as a human. But also, I love the story of the underdog. I love the story of people who are overcoming obstacles and who are not going to let those obstacles get in the way of what they want from life.
And that's an interesting story about the NBA basketball player who hated playing basketball, because, typically you got to be pretty passionate and dedicated to be able to get to that level of success. Because what I've seen a lot of people, whether it's in baseball or other sports, who have the natural talent and ability, but they were miserable or they hated doing it. And they were never able to rise to the level of being in the NBA. I mean, it's so incredibly difficult to get to the NBA or get to Major League Baseball or, women's soccer professionally. Any of that kind of stuff is so tough. So it's interesting
Yeah.
and right. And what a awesome it is for you to be able to have all those role models.
And I think the best thing they role model, about a week ago from when we're recording this, I had the unique opportunity to fly to Boston and sit down with David Ortiz, so Big Papi, multiple World Series champion winner, and Drew Holiday, who's won 2 national championships in the NBA and also a gold medalist in the Olympics. And I said, what's the key to your success? You both are repeat champions. What's been the key to your success? And they both had the same answer. And the answer was discipline. So to your point, you can have all the gifts bestowed on you. You could have this natural, unique athletic talent. But if you don't have the discipline to wake up every day and prime that talent and optimize it, it's a wasted talent. And so I think that's also been a through line in my life where I've been blessed. I've been blessed with gifts of being able to storytell, to write, to speak. And every single day I have to hone that craft and work on getting better.
What percentage of your time right now are you spending interviewing, doing journalistic work?
Great question. The answer is it depends. I do have a full-time job as a tenured professor at Pepperdine University. So the journalistic work is more of a passion project and a side hustle, if you will. I wouldn't call it that, but it's hard to break it down as a hard percentage. It's something that flows into my everyday existence and what I'm doing overarchingly.
Nick Silverthorne, great, colleague that we work with, a young guy, also an athlete, like an amazing swimmer at Cal. And he's sort of your target. Like when you were writing the book, you want to have your audience in mind. And so Nick was kind of your audience, right? How is Nick doing now? And what would Nick say is the helpful parts of this book, or maybe even just like what would Nick say is like the helpful thing to be paying attention to? What do you want your target audience to be thinking about?
I think first of all, I think Nick is doing a fantastic job. And what I want my targeted audience to be thinking about, especially because remember, ChatGPT, I talk about AI and technology in my book, but it was prior to ChatGPT. And so since then, I think that Nick and a lot of members of our team, almost I think everybody, is the willingness to adapt and be creative, innovative with where the world is going and around AI and how to leverage AI, not to replace humans, but how to leverage AI and, get better and better. And I think that that's something that we're doing at Learn It as an organization. And it's the mindset that I've shown, that Nick's shown, that you've shown, just like that video you made for me the other day about the habit coach. It's like, I think that it's a great example of the learn it all mentality where it's like, we have to keep learning and have to keep evolving and you have to have learning agility because the pace that things are evolving these days with artificial intelligence, AI, it's incredible. So that's really, I think, one of the biggest takeaways that hopefully when people read my book and the target audience is that let's just keep learning and evolving, and especially around what's happening in the world with AI.
Keep learning, keep growing. Reminds me of that, still got the fire kind of thing we were saying at the beginning. How do you help people? Because sometimes I just want to park on the couch in front of the TV with a bowl of ice cream.
So do I.
Stay there for 2 days. How do you keep moving forwards with such motivation?
I keep moving forward with such motivation because I look at the team we have at Learn It. Let's say we have 50, 60 people at Learn It, and I look at my own family, and I feel a lot of responsibility. I feel a responsibility to make sure that Learn It is always relevant, and not just for our team, Darren, and my family, but also for our customers. That we're aligning what our product and services are with what they need to be able to meet their challenges or their skill gaps or their goals. And so that a lot of times that's what motivates me, is that I don't want Learn It to be leapfrogged by other organizations. And I don't want to let our team members or our customers down. So I take it upon, I think a lot of times I take it upon myself and hold myself accountable to really do my share to keep learning and growing. And that's also really important just for our culture at Learn It, right? Because how can we get out there and champion having a learn it all culture, learning, if I'm not going to do it myself? And I think that's important for leaders out there that want to have a learning culture. You need to lead by example.
Yeah, I think people lose sight of the fact that it's it's really often about helping others. Like the motivation comes from wanting to help others, not just kind of give in for you. And what you're saying is that that's the motivation to keep learning. Like the best thing that you can do for other people is to keep learning. And that makes perfect sense, especially like in a work environment where you work with a bunch of other people. If you have that learning mentality, that's how you create a better culture together, how you get over issues, that might, and conflicts that might surface. That's the attitude you learn for other people.
I like what you said there. And I think it was Elias Simpson in one of our episodes said the same thing. Great leaders realize that they're working for somebody else. They're working on behalf of their team. It's not about me. It's really servant leadership. I think great leaders realize that they're working on behalf of and supporting their team.
We should start wrapping this up a little bit, Dan, but I got a couple other questions for you. One of them, going back to, you mentioned that you didn't tell everybody. So when your siblings finally saw the book and your mom, how did they react?
Well, I could have written my name on a card, handed it to my mom, and she would have cried. So obviously she was beyond excited. My brothers and sisters couldn't believe it, and they're just like, I don't even know if you made it through college, and here you are writing a book. What happened? And what I loved is that when they read it, they're like, wow, this is like sitting down at a dinner table with you talking. And so they were incredibly proud, and it made me feel really, really, really good.
Yeah. I think this is one of the reasons the book has been so successful. And I really had that sense, honestly, when I read it too. I felt, well, this is great, and a lot of people are going to appreciate this. And I was glad that I really wanted you to get out there and start promoting this. But I think a lot of why it works is the storytelling. There's just a lot of great stories in it. And now, of course, that you've been doing all these podcasts and get up on stages, because you don't really talk about storytelling in the book, but you display a lot of good storytelling. So how important is being a good storyteller to somebody like Nick or aspiring leaders?
Well, I learned how to be, I wouldn't say I'm not as great of a storyteller as you are. I think I'm a pretty good storyteller, and I learned it from my dad. Really, he was a great, great storyteller. I think it's critical and I'm getting better at storytelling. But I think for leaders, I think it's critical to be a great storyteller, because that's how, whether it's your team or your customers or your family, that's how they'll resonate and they'll understand the concepts that you're trying to share with them. If you give them some technical model on whether it's on how to give better feedback or listening or whatever it is you're going to do, but if you could tie it to a story and they could say, okay, now I understand what you're talking about, right? That's why storytelling is so important. And I've read several books on storytelling, as well as, I'm always picking your brain around it. So I think that's one of those key skills for everybody, is you want to get great at, I think, storytelling. And also another one is decision making.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, interesting you bring that up. I'm about to go teach a storytelling class in a couple of hours.
I have
here.
a question for you, though, before we get out.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
So my question is, since my book came out, Learn It All Leader, how has it impacted your thoughts or changed anything around, our content at Learn It? Has that had any kind of impact at all?
Oh, well, definitely. I mean, you're talking about decision making. This is one of the ways that it's factored into the book. You divided the book into mindset and then behaviors that you can actually take. And the mindset piece, especially the curiosity, has featured its way in everything that we talked about since then. And I'm a big fan of that, because in the way that you like to champion, learning as the path forward, for me, curiosity is such a key piece. It's almost like curiosity is what fuels the learning, the attitude and learning that helps you keep moving forwards and get over those kind of obstacles and conflicts with people. And your book opened that door in lots of ways. So for me, that was one of the big pieces. It's also just been because of the stories and the publicity, it makes it easier for us to step into a room and feel like we have a position. Here are the kinds of things that we lead with: humility, curiosity, courage, integrity. Those are your themes. And now we can be known for that. And I can just bake it into everything that we do.
Great. Thank you. Oak, I've heard you describe the state of leadership as horrendous around the world. And, honestly, I can't say I disagree. So in your opinion, what is missing and what needs to be changed?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's a two-part to that. I think number one, we got to get back to having servant leaders who understand that it's not about them. It's not about the title they get or the privileges they get or they get more pay. Let's face it, leaders get those things, and that's okay as long as that's not the only reason you want to be the leader. That's the only reason you want to be the leader. Please go do something else. You're not going to be a good one. It's all about you and how you empower the people that you have the privilege to lead, and it is a privilege, and how you run your organization. And we got to get back to having servant leaders who put their people first. In the Army, we had this saying called, it said, mission first, people always. You got to accomplish, I got it. And if you run a business, you got to make money. I got that. You got to if you want to stay in business, then you got to be successful. But there's no reason that you have to sacrifice taking care of the people that you have the privilege to lead to be successful. And the second part of that I absolutely believe, and there's two words, accountability and responsibility. And accountability is a dirty word in this country today, but we got to start holding people accountable, from the lowest person in the organization that you just hired to the CEO. They all have to be held accountable for their actions, for their performance. And then responsibility, which I think that too many leaders in every profession are trying to pick and choose what they're responsible for. Well, that went well. I'm going to take credit for that. That didn't go well. I'm going to blame Damon for that. Sorry. Leaders don't get to pick and choose what you're responsible for. Your name is on the blame line all the time. You have to own everything that happens in your organization as a leader, good and bad. And that is on you. Even if you weren't the one who messed it up, doesn't matter. You're in charge. You should have seen that coming and helped prevent it. So I think those two words, servant leadership and then accountability and responsibility, I see a huge lack in all three of those.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And you said so much there. And one of the things that you said was that if people want to be leaders, why do they want to be a leader? Because I've worked with a lot of, especially sales reps, who are fantastic individual contributors who get pushed into a leadership role, and they flat out don't belong in that type of role. And it's a completely different skill set, right?
Absolutely it is. And how do we promote people generally in the business world? It's you got a great salesman who does a great job, and so you promote him up there to the next level without giving him the training.
Mm-hmm.
You're setting them up for failure and your organization up for failure because you haven't trained them. And I see that all the time. And the other piece of that is I was talking to a guy about 2 months ago. He's got a company here in the Orlando area. And he told me, he said, well, I got great people who fit my culture and who work hard, but they just can't do the job I have them in. And I said, so it sounds like you got the right people on the bus, you just don't have them in the right seats. So, okay, you don't want to get rid of this guy because he's a great worker, he fits your culture. Find a different job for him that he can do, that he will be good at. Or train him to do the job you've got him in so that he does do a good job. But it just comes down to that. I mean, I think a lot of times what I see is owners or businessmen or CEOs, they expect people to meet a standard, but they've never trained them to that standard. How can you hold somebody to a standard that you haven't trained them to? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
It makes no sense, I mean, and I see it quite often. Somebody I mentored, they got moved into promoted, and I asked them why they wanted to be a leader, and they said, well, we'll look good on my LinkedIn profile. I get a little bit of a raise, and I said, this is exactly the wrong reason to do it. They get put into that role. They get no training. 6 months later, his team's frustrated, right? Because he's not leading well. And he's even considering leaving the organization because he doesn't feel like he can reach out to the CEO and tell him that they made a mistake. So it's just something that listeners out there, if you're leading a team, you got to be really mindful of who you're promoting and why, and focusing on, like you said, people's strengths.
Yeah, well, and you hit it exactly on the head. Not only is the team frustrated, and the owner or whoever promoted them are probably frustrated, but the person is frustrated. They don't want to be in a position that they're not successful at. If otherwise, you probably wouldn't have promoted them, because they're hard chargers. They want to do good at whatever it is they do. But if you don't train them, give them the things they need to be successful, they're not going to be, unless they just take it on their own to learn those things. But most people don't have time to do that. If you've promoted them, now that they got to learn a whole bunch of new things just for that, they don't have time for their own professional development. So you got to provide that for them.
Well, let's take it back a step. So you have over 40 years of leadership experience. Where did your level of leadership begin?
That's funny. I was, I grew up in a small little farm town in northern Illinois, 1,200 people. And I played baseball, basketball, football in high school, 8th grade in high school. And I was always the captain of my team. And I was the student government president and a student class president. So I kind of got into that leadership stuff just because the coach wanted me to. And I found out I liked it. I liked being able to help people become better at whatever it was, whether it was football, basketball, baseball, whether I could help people as the student class president. And I really, really liked it. And I had 2 mentors in high school who kind of started me on that servant leadership path. The two that probably had more influence on me as a kid other than my parents was my basketball coach, Coach Terry Nijwicki, who was absolutely, and who I still stay in contact with, who is absolutely understood servant leadership. He understood that, yeah, he was a basketball coach. He needed to produce a good basketball team. But on top of that, he understood that his main job was to create good young men who were going to leave high school and be good husbands, good fathers, good citizens for this country. And he drilled that into us. You do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because somebody's watching or because somebody's going to check up on you. If you're the leader, they are watching and they are going to check up on you, but that's not why you do it. You do it because it's the right thing. And the other one was my high school history teacher. And I majored in history in college because of him. There is no doubt about it. And I stayed in contact with him up until about a year ago when he passed away. And he was the same way. He was a very servant leader who understood that it wasn't just about his teaching history in high school. It was about helping young men and women get through that part of their life so that they could move on and be successful afterwards. And I don't care what problem you had. If you had a problem, you could go in his classroom during a break and you could sit down and he would talk to you and give you options. He wouldn't tell you what to do. He gave you options. Well, in my life, I've had something similar to that. And here's the 2 or 3 different things that I used. Now it's up to you to figure out which one you want to use, but at least he was there to give you those. So servant leadership has been huge for me, and it started in high school, and that's kind of where I got started as a leader. Then as I got ready to graduate from high school, I decided I liked being a leader and I wanted to be a leader, and that's when I decided to go the Army path and be an officer in the Army.
And so, and I love what you're saying, because I kind of reflect back on some of the coaches and leaders I had, and they have such an amazing impact on your life. And what Oak's saying, and I really believe in too, is that, whether you're leading a team in the business world or you're coaching or you're a parent, you can have such an impact on people's lives. And one of the things you can do as well is help bring out the greatness in people and help them understand what they're capable of achieving. It's so wonderful.
I tell people all the time, as a leader, you are going to make a difference in people's lives every day. good or bad, and that's your choice. So why not make a conscious decision to make a positive impact on at least one person's life every day? Imagine how much better this world would be, how much better our families, our neighbors, our community, our cities, our state, our country, the world would be if everybody went out every day, found one person and made a positive impact on their life.
It's interesting that you're so into servant leadership because you look at your title, you're a retired lieutenant colonel, right? And I think when people think of the Army, I know I did at first, is you think about authoritative leadership, command and control. But here you are talking about servant leadership. So how did that come about for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are certainly leaders in the military who are authoritarian, micromanaging, do it exactly as I tell you to do it leaders. But I've been lucky in my life. I had a few of those, and believe me, I didn't like working for those people. But I've had a bunch of leaders in my career who eventually ended up a 2, 3, 4-star general, who for whatever reason took an interest in me and mentored me, and they were servant leaders. And they understood that it wasn't about them. It was about the team and about the people they had the privilege to lead. And one of them one day told me, he said, Oak, that leadership is on a scale. He said, on this end of the scale, you have that authoritarian, micromanaging, do it exactly as I tell you how to do it type of leader. He said, and on that end of the scale, you have no creativity in your organization. He said, nobody's going to stick their neck out there. Nobody's going to come up with ideas because they're just going to wait for you to tell them exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it. Get no creativity whatsoever. And he said, on this end of the scale, you have Attila the Hun and chaos. Controlled chaos, but chaos. He said, and that's where you want to be because that's where creativity happens. That's where you're using other people's skills, other people's knowledge, other people's abilities. And I don't care how long you've been doing, whatever you're doing, you don't have all the answers, I promise you. If you think you do, you need to go do something else. And he said, and the way you get there, which is kind of goes back to what we talked about in the beginning, how you get there is, number one, is that you build a culture that everybody understands, so you know when they make a decision, they're going to make it inside of the culture that is acceptable for that organization. You train them to the standard that you want them to meet, so you know they can meet the standard you're asking them to do. You give them the resources that they need, time, money, people, equipment, whatever it is. You give them authority. That's where a lot of leaders don't want to give away their authority. You have, as a leader, authority by your title. But you can give it away, let people use that authority to get that job done that you've asked them to do. If you don't give them the authority, then they're not really the leader of that project or job or whatever it is you've asked them to do. He said, and then you get out of their way and you let them do it. He said, will they do it exactly the way you would have done it? Absolutely not. But who cares? And the analogy that I always use is if you got to get me to the number 9, if my team has to get me to the number 9, why do I care how you get me to 9? 7 plus 2 is 9, but so is 6 plus 3, and 5 plus 4, and 8 plus 1. I don't care how you get me there. Stay inside the culture, use the resources that I gave you, and get me to 9. That's all I care about. And that's what happens when you're that type of servant leader who understands that it's not about you and that you don't have all the answers. The problem that we have in the military and in business today is that leaders can't put their ego aside to ask other people for ideas and use other people's knowledge, skills, and abilities. And look, we all have an ego. Anybody who tells you they don't have an ego is lying to you. We all have an ego, and we want people to have an ego because that's what drives them to be successful. That's what drives them to be the best at whatever they want to do. But good leaders know when to put that ego aside and use other people's knowledge, skills, and abilities.
And so are you saying that they're not willing to hand off authority because of ego? Is there anything else that's preventing that from happening?
I do. I think that we have gotten to a point in this country where it's cover my butt. If I make a mistake, I might not get, if my organization doesn't do exactly what we need it to do, then I may not get my next promotion. I may not get my next pay raise. Again, going back to the selfish piece of it instead of selfless service, very selfish part of it. And the thing I always, I've had my hand in commissioning over 600 lieutenants for the Army and for the nation. And I used to tell every single one of them, if you do what I'm telling you to do, if you're a servant leader and you take care of people, you will get your next promotion. You will get your next pay raise because you're going to make people better, who's then going to make the organization better, and you're going to get credit for it because you are responsible for everything that happens or doesn't happen in your organization.
Let's talk a little bit more about, and we're going to get to the plan, but I'm curious a little bit more about how it helps you sleep better and reduce stress. Because I think that's so important, both of those.
Yeah, for me personally, and I'll speak just from personal experience, when it comes to like all I want to accomplish, like my goals in life, setting those goals are often involve things that are stretching me, right? Stretching me to go beyond where I'm at today, to become through that journey someone I'm not yet, right? And if I just set those goals and then just jumped in, those are likely to transpire a little bit differently than they would if I would take a step back and think to myself, okay, who's accomplished this goal before me, right? Who's solved this problem already, and who might have solved it and also written about it, right? And so I think back to when, a couple of decades ago, when I had set some goals for myself, and I realized, Damon, that the goals I set for myself would involve me becoming comfortable with something I wasn't at that time comfortable with, and that was public speaking. I realized if I'm going to do the things I want to do in life, I'm going to have to get comfortable with this thing called public speaking, something that at the time was terrifying to me, to the point that it was debilitating. It was I couldn't get up in front of a room full of people without looking visibly nervous, without shaking, without my voice quivering, all those things. And so I realized then that the best way for me to push through that was to look at who might have suffered from that before, who's writing about this topic now, and also to break it down into smaller pieces, like not start with like the overarching, public speaking topic and dive into books on public speaking more broadly, but think about how can I break this down into smaller steps. And so I started reading books on presentation design early on. And this is kind of funny to say this now, but my thinking at the time was, I'm going to focus first on creating these really compelling slides that really grab people's attention and communicate my ideas in just a really effective and eye-catching ways. And my thinking, the funny part is my thinking was, maybe I can get people to spend more time looking at my slides than looking at me.
I figured you're going to say that. Yeah.
I think less nervous. And I read books like Presentation Zen by Gar Reynolds and Slideology by Nancy Duarte. And once I'd read 2 or 3 books on that and began putting into practice what I was learning, in front of very small audiences that I could feel I could still handle, then I moved to presentation structure. Like, how do you effectively structure a presentation? And I read books like The Secrets of Dynamic Communication by comedian and public speaker Ken Davis. And I learned that, well, it depends on what kind of presentation you're delivering. Is it a how type of talk, or is it a why type of talk? That's gonna factor in. And then I went from presentation structure to presentation delivery. And I read books like Tim Pollard's The Compelling Communicator and how to effectively deliver a presentation. And then eventually I went to probably where I should have started in hindsight, if I'm being honest, and that's presentation fears. And I read books like Fearless Speaking from Gary Gennard. And eventually on to injecting humor into presentation. So I just broke it down into these subtopics and found books, which was not hard to do, on just that subset of the larger topic of public speaking, and reading 2 or 3 books in each of those subtopics and building confidence as I went along, and not trying to get everything right all at once.
No, I think that's great. And what I hear you saying too is you really focus on deliberate practice. You pick one specific area, read about it, and work on that, and that would help you overcome the fear. And books were a great partner for you on that.
Right, right.
I think that's so important too, especially for new leaders, as maybe they're stepping into a leadership role for the first time, and maybe their company isn't supporting them with any type of formal training. One of the areas I recommend is to start with reading biographies, because, like you said, learn from other people who've done things like that before. Do you have any great recommendations for biographies?
Yes, yes, I love a good biography too. The most recent one I've read several of Walter Isaacson's biographies. The most recent one was his Elon Musk biography. I actually listened to that one on Audible. I didn't purchase the physical copy. I generally prefer physical copies of books, but in that case, I listened to that one. But also Benjamin Franklin, An American Life, another Walter Isaacson penned book, and then his Steve Jobs biography. I've read a number of presidential biographies on Washington and Adams and Jefferson and Lincoln. And then more recently than that, one of my favorite biographers is Brian J. Jones. I've had him on the show to talk about a book of his that I just stumbled upon in Target one day and thought, oh, that looks interesting. It's called Becoming Dr. Seuss, Theodore Geisel and the Making of an American Imagination. And went and wrote a review of that book on Amazon, and he contacted me, and we started a conversation and ended up inviting him on the show. I think that may be the only time I've ever had the author of a biography on Read to Lead. But he's also written a book called Jim Henson, the biography, of course, Jim Henson, the Muppets creator, and George Lucas, A Life, which I also own. So those are three of my favorite Brian J. Jones biographies.
Oh, I'll check it out. Now, as a leader and you're reading these biographies, what advice do you have for them for our listeners to really extract, or to be, like you say, be intentional about getting content out of it for them that they can leverage to become a better leader?
What I try to do when I go through a book is I make a couple of passes. And I start with a chapter and I skim the headings and the subheadings and kind of wrap my mind around what it is the author's trying to communicate. And then I go back to the beginning of a chapter. And as I'm reading, I'm often just limiting myself to just making a couple of marks here and there and not yet in that taking notes phase. Like if it's something of particular importance that I definitely want to dig into more deeply, I'll put an asterisk or a star next to it. If there's something I'm not quite sure I understand, or maybe it's something I don't think I agree with, I'll put a question mark in that spot. And then if there's a particularly pithy quote or something the author said that I want to remember that's quote worthy, I'll put a Q next to it. And then once I've finished that section of reading I'm doing, Damon, is I'll go back to where I've made those markings in that second pass, or maybe I guess third pass in this case, and that's where I'll begin to start taking notes. So one of the reasons I do that is the way I do it with just the little markings at first is I try to read uninterrupted when possible, and then go back and go, okay, what was it about this that was so important to me? Why do I question this? What's that quote that I want to remember? And then I take these things and transfer them to my notes app. I've got a digital notes app. I use an app called Obsidian, and that's where all my notes for not just books but any notes I have live. They're all in this one vault, if you will, and that's because I want new ideas that I'm coming up with, or new information, new things I'm learning as I'm reading a new book, to have the ability to crash into all the old ones, like all the previous ones, right? And so that's where I find a lot of value in digital notes apps. And Obsidian is a great one for allowing for what's called bilateral or bidirectional linking. And new ideas can more easily and serendipitously crash into the old ones. And it's oftentimes those seemingly disparate concepts or ideas that on the surface don't look like they relate. When those kind of things have the opportunity to coexist and live in the same place, that's where some pretty fascinating things and exciting things can happen.
No, that's where you could unlock the gold. Do you have any, put you on the spot, do you have any examples of that? Maybe an idea that you came across recently, or like, oh wow, and then you connected it back to an older one?
Recently I was, and this doesn't relate to necessarily a new idea per se, to the crux of your question, but it's sort of adjacent to your question, so maybe this will answer it. I was recently delivering a talk, and as recent as a couple of weeks ago, on fear, and one of the things I did to start was I thought, well, what have I collected over the last decade and a half, let's say, on the topic of fear. And some of those things were brought to the surface quite quickly. But one of the things that I was able to surface from that was a related topic, and that's discomfort. I often use those words interchangeably, discomfort and fear. And it led me down a path I hadn't thought to go on. And that discomfort path led me down this place from 40 years ago. And think back to the song, the recording of the song "We Are the World." You remember that song, right?
I love the song and the new documentary.
Yeah, and this new documentary reveals something that is discomfort related and fear related, and the documentary talks in part about how many of these artists who came together, who were themselves famous and had accomplished so much, they were intimidated by all the other people around them and felt like imposters, right?
Totally.
And so this example was surfaced, and I was able to include that in my talk about, you may suffer from inadequacy. That may be one of your fears, right? It's one of the 10 fears we talked about. You may suffer from imposter syndrome. Well, guess who else does, right? It affects everybody, and you're no different. And so just by nature of the fact that my notes from my reading and also my notes from my Netflix watching and other things live together in the same place, I can find things that have a connection that I wouldn't have necessarily seen without them living in the same place. And for me, that was something I had taken away from watching a Netflix documentary. Another thing I took away from another documentary I watched had to do with something Disney related. I don't remember the exact documentary, but it was something Disney related. And I used this also in my fear talk, where a Disney Imagineer said something to the effect of fear minus death equals fun. And that has always stuck with me, that if the death representing whatever the thing is you're most afraid of happening, like what's the worst case scenario? If you can logically remove that from the equation, and maybe it's because you're just overthinking it, maybe it's because you've taken steps to lessen the likelihood of that happening, whatever it might be. If you can subtract quote unquote death from the equation, then fear eventually leads to reward, eventually leads to fun. If you can push through that fear and allow yourself to get outside your comfort zone, that's where all the magic happens, right? And so it's these kind of different, otherwise disparate sources of ideas coming together under one roof, informing a singular piece of output that I'm working on.